Welcome to another episode of the Ginger ROAMance. Here, you'll hear anonymous stories from travellers all over the world. Real submissions from real people. Tales of connection, romance, passion, heartbreak, friendship, and love in all its forms. Because every kind of love deserves to be told. This week on the Ginger ROAMance, we share a passionate encounter set in Trieste, Italy. This is a story about surrendering to the moment, being led in all the right ways, and discovering a side of yourself you didn't know was waiting. Let's get into it. I wasn't supposed to be there. Trieste was never on the list. Never bookmarked, never romanticised in my daydreams the way other places had been. I was meant to pass through, a brief pause between somewhere I had been and somewhere I thought I needed to go. But travel has a way of rearranging you when you least expect it. And that morning, it started with something small. A missed train. It was the kind of mistake that, in any other version of myself, would have unravelled the day. But something in me had softened by then. Months of moving, of being alone, of letting plans fall apart had taught me a quiet kind of surrender. So instead of rushing to fix it, I just stayed. The air felt different there. Salted, almost sweet, carried in long sighs from the sea. The buildings stood like faded postcards, worn but elegant. There was a stillness to the place, as though it existed just slightly outside of time. And that's where I met him. Not in a cafe or a bar, not through some predictable unfolding, but in a narrow bookstore tucked between two pale stone buildings, the kind of place that smelled like paper and quiet secrets. I had gone in to find a new book to read, but instead, I found him holding a book he didn't seem to be reading and leaning against a shelf like he owned the silence. He looked at me once briefly, and then again with intention, certainty, recognition without reason. I should have looked away, but I didn't. We spoke because it felt natural to. The conversation didn't start politely. There was no softness to ease into. He made a comment about the book I picked up, something slightly teasing, slightly dismissive. There was an ease to him, but also something restrained, like he chose his words carefully, as if language mattered. I challenged him. He didn't back down. That was the first spark. Not sweet, sharp. We walked out together without deciding to. It wasn't planned. Nothing about those 2 days were. The city unfolded around us in quiet layers. Wide squares that opened suddenly from narrow streets. The sea stretching endlessly beside us. Cafes filled with people who seemed to have nowhere else to be. There was something disarming about the way he moved through the city. He didn't ask what I wanted to do. He didn't over-explain. He just led. Subtly, but undeniably. A hand at the small of my back as we crossed the street. A glance over his shoulder to make sure I was still there, already knowing I would be. I noticed it immediately. I didn't have to think. That alone felt dangerous. We stopped at a cafe that spilled onto the street. He ordered for both of us without asking, then watched me as I took my first sip. Not in a way that felt controlling, but in a way that made me aware I was being observed. Studied, almost. Good? He asked. It wasn't really about the drink. I nodded anyway. The conversation never stayed in safe territory. He didn't ask me the usual travel questions. He asked what I avoided, what I wanted but didn't admit. It should have felt invasive, but it didn't. It felt deliberate. And I realised quickly this wasn't accidental for him. He knew exactly what he was doing. By the time the sun started dipping, I felt different. Not swept up, not lost, just heightened, like every sense had been turned slightly louder. We found ourselves in a small wine bar, the kind where the glasses don't match and the owner pours generously. The air was warm, heavy with conversation and soft music. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows, but inside, everything felt suspended. That's when his hand found mine, as he passed me a glass of wine. Not hesitant, not questioning. Decisive. Dinner blurred into something else. The place, the food, I barely remember. What I do remember is the way he kept control of the rhythm of the night. Slowing things down when the tension built too quickly, then leaning into it just enough to keep it alive. I realised at some point I wasn't leading anything. And instead of resisting that, I let it happen. That's what caught me off guard. There are moments in life where you feel yourself standing on the edge of something, not knowing exactly what it is, but understanding that stepping forward will change the shape of everything that follows. Back at his place, it didn't explode into chaos. It tightened. The space between us thickened, stretched until it felt almost unbearable. He didn't rush me. That's what made it worse. His hands were deliberate, confident without being careless. He took his time like he knew exactly how far to go before pulling back. It wasn't about urgency. It was about control. Not over me, but over the moment. And I let him have it. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't soft. It was certain. Like he'd already decided this was happening long before I had caught up to it. And somehow, I was already there. Everything after that blurred into sensation. Not rushed, not clumsy, precise. He paid attention in a way that made me hyper-aware of my own reactions. Every shift, every breath. It was like he was reading them, adjusting, pushing just enough. There was intensity in it. Not reckless, but strong, grounded, unapologetic. The kind that makes you stop thinking entirely. I didn't feel delicate. I felt taken seriously. That night wasn't about losing control. It was about handing it over, willingly, because I trusted he knew what to do with it. And he did. Morning didn't dilute anything. If anything, it sharpened it. There was no awkwardness, no retreat into politeness. He was the same, steady, composed, slightly unreadable. But there was something else now too. A quiet satisfaction, like he knew exactly the effect he had on me. We didn't linger in bed talking about feelings. We moved. Coffee, a walk, the city again. But this time, there was an undercurrent running through everything. Every glance held something unspoken. Every touch carried memory. He didn't smother. He didn't disappear either. He stayed right on that edge. The second day felt like being in on a secret no one else could see. I noticed the way people looked at us, not because we were obvious, but because there was a tension between us that didn't quite settle. That night was different. Less restraint. Still controlled, but deeper, more assured. Like whatever line had existed the night before had been erased. There was a confidence to the way he moved with me, like he'd already learned everything he needed to know, and instead of exploring, he refined it, built on it. It wasn't just intensity. It was precision. He knew when to push, when to slow, when to hold me still just long enough that I felt everything more sharply. There was strength in it, but never carelessness. He paid attention the entire time, and that made it impossible to drift out of the moment. It didn't feel overwhelming. It felt matched, completely, and that was rare. We didn't talk about what it meant. We both knew it didn't need to mean anything beyond what it was. The morning I left, the city felt different again. No heavy energy, no unspoken disappointment, just a kind of mutual understanding that whatever had happened had already reached its natural end. He didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask him to come with me. We stood there for a moment, close but not clinging. He kissed me once, slower this time, almost thoughtful. And then it was over. I walked away feeling different. Not softer, not more romantic, stronger. Like I had stepped into something fully, without overthinking it, without needing to control it, and came out of it knowing exactly what I was capable of feeling. It wasn't love. It wasn't meant to be. But it was real and it was powerful. And it reminded me that sometimes the most unforgettable connections are the ones that don't ask to stay. They just arrive, take hold, and leave you changed forever.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you're following along to keep up to date with weekly stories that will inspire, entertain, and maybe even make you fall in love with the idea of love itself. Got your own romance story and want to be a part of the Ginger Romance community? Check the notes for details on how to submit your own.